You think you know how this ends. You've seen the headlines. A power-tripping officer, a vulnerable victim, a tragic outcome. But what happened on a humid Tuesday in Charleston wasn't a tragedy. It was a trap. Officer Kyle Vanner thought he was bullying a helpless pensioner. He didn't know he was staring down the barrel of a legend. He didn't know that the man in that wheelchair wasn't just watching him, he was profiling him. And by the time the badge was ripped from Vanner's chest, it was already too late. This is the story of the mistake that ended a career in seconds. The heat in Charleston, South Carolina, has a way of sticking to you, a wet blanket that smells of jasmine and asphalt. For 70-year-old Elijah Bennett, it was the kind of heat that made his joints ache, a phantom throb in legs that hadn't walked in 12 years. Elijah sat at his usual table outside the Daily Grind, a small coffee shop tucked away in the historic district. It was a wealthy neighborhood, the kind where the lawns were manicured with nail scissors and the residents drove cars that cost more than Elijah's first house. He didn't live here, not anymore, but he liked the coffee, and he liked the view of the park across the street. He adjusted the blanket over his lap, smoothing out the wrinkles. To the casual observer, Elijah was invisible. Just another old black man in a wheelchair, wearing a faded navy baseball cap and a windbreaker that was too warm for the season. He looked harmless, fragile even. His hands, resting on the armrests of his motorized chair, shook slightly, a side effect of the medication, not fear. But eyes don't age the way bodies do, and Elijah's eyes were sharp, scanning the street with a rhythm ingrained over 40 years of service. He watched a businessman drop his wallet. He watched a teenager nervously checking his phone. He watched a blue patrol car slow roll past the intersection for the third time in 10 minutes. "Refill, Mr. Bennett?" Elijah looked up and smiled at Sarah, the barista. She was 22, with bright blue hair and a nose ring, and she was one of the few people who looked at him, not through him. "Please, Sarah. Black. No sugar. I'm sweet enough." She laughed, a genuine sound that cut through the humidity. "You're trouble, Elijah. That's what you are." "Only on Tuesdays," he winked. As Sarah turned back to the shop, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle, a drop in barometric pressure that Elijah felt before he saw it. The blue patrol car had circled back. This time it didn't pass. The cruiser, emblazoned with the city's police seal, mounted the curb aggressively, tires screeching just inches from the outdoor seating area. Dust kicked up, coating Elijah's coffee cup. The engine cut. The door swung open. Officer Kyle Vanner stepped out. He was a caricature of authority, tall, broad-shouldered, with a buzz cut and sunglasses that hid his eyes but couldn't hide the sneer on his lips. He adjusted his utility belt, the leather creaking loudly in the silence that had suddenly fallen over the cafe. His hand rested casually, too casually, near his holster. Elijah didn't flinch. He took a sip of his coffee, tasting the grit of the dust. He knew the type. He'd worked with hundreds of them, fired dozens of them, and put a few of them behind bars. Vanner was a cowboy, young, insecure, and desperate to prove he was the alpha in every room. Vanner didn't walk. He prowled. He scanned the patrons, the businessman, a young mother with a stroller, a couple of tourists. His gaze slid over them and locked onto Elijah. The predator had found its prey. "You!" Vanner barked, pointing a gloved finger. "Move!" Elijah slowly lowered his cup. He looked around theatrically, then pointed to his own chest. "Me, officer?" "Yeah, you. Move the chair. You're blocking the sidewalk." Elijah looked down. His wheelchair was tucked neatly against the wrought iron fence of the cafe. There was a good 6 feet of clearance on the sidewalk. A marching band could have passed without breaking stride. "I believe there's plenty of room, officer," Elijah said. his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I'm just enjoying my coffee." Vanna marched over, invading Elijah's personal space. He loomed over the wheelchair, blocking out the sun. The smell of stale chewing tobacco and aggressive cologne wafted off him. "I didn't ask for your opinion, Pop-Pop," Vanna spat. "I said you're blocking the sidewalk. This is a public thoroughfare. You're creating a hazard, loitering, disturbing the peace." Elijah kept his hands visible. "Rule number 1. Never give them a reason." "I'm a paying customer, officer. I have a receipt right here." "I don't care about your receipt. I care about the law. And right now, the law says you move." Vanna leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You don't belong in this neighborhood, do you? You look lost." There it was. The code. You don't belong. Elijah met the officer's gaze behind the sunglasses. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Vanna's jaw clenched. He wasn't used to pushback. He was used to fear. He was used to "yes, sir" and scrambling feet. This old man's calmness wasn't just annoying, it was insulting. "Last warning," Vanna said, his hand twitching toward his baton. "Move the chair, or I'll move it for you." Sarah rushed out of the shop, a dish towel in her hand. "Officer, is there a problem? Mr. Bennett comes here every day. He's not bothering anyone." Vanna spun on her, his finger jabbing the air. "Back off, miss, unless you want a citation for obstruction of justice. This is police business." "He's drinking coffee," Sarah cried, her voice trembling but defiant. "He's refusing a lawful order," Vanna roared. He turned back to Elijah, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. "Get up." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Get up?" "You heard me. Stand up and move the chair. I want to see if you're hiding anything in there. We've had reports of drug activity in the area. A cripple in a fancy chair makes for a great mule." The accusation was so absurd, it would have been funny if the danger wasn't so palpable. "Officer," Elijah said, his voice hardening, losing the fragile grandfatherly tone. "I am a paraplegic. I cannot stand up, and you have no probable cause to search me." "I am the probable cause," Vanna shouted. He reached out and grabbed the joystick of Elijah's wheelchair. "Don't touch that," Elijah warned. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. Vanna yanked the joystick. The high-torque motors engaged instantly. The heavy chair lurched forward, slamming into the metal table. Coffee flew everywhere, scalding Elijah's hand. The table tipped over with a deafening crash. Elijah was thrown sideways, his seatbelt the only thing keeping him from hitting the concrete. He groaned as the strap dug into his chest, flaring the old shrapnel pain near his spine. "Whoops," Vanna sneered, though his eyes showed no remorse. "Looks like you lost control, operating a vehicle under the influence." "You son of a—" Sarah screamed, lunging forward, but a patron held her back. "Call the police!" someone yelled. "I am the police!" Vanna bellowed, spinning in a circle to address the gathering crowd. "Step back! This man is resisting arrest!" He turned back to Elijah, who was struggling to right himself in the tilted chair. Vanna unclipped his taser. The yellow plastic gleamed in the sun. "Get out of the chair," Vanna commanded, aiming the weapon at Elijah's chest. "On the ground. Now." Elijah looked at the taser, then up at Vanna. The fear should have been there, the panic, but all Vanna saw in those dark, aged eyes was a cold, terrifying calculation. "You're making a mistake, son," Elijah said softly. "A career-ending mistake." The air in the cafe courtyard crackled, thick with the static of imminent violence. The bystanders were frozen, phones raised, recording. Vanna knew he was being filmed. He didn't care. In his mind, the camera was just an audience for his authority. He was the good guy. He was cleaning up the streets. "I said on the ground!" Vanna screamed, the veins in his neck bulging. "Stop reaching." Elijah wasn't reaching. His hands were resting on his lap, palms open. I am not reaching. I am unable to exit the chair without assistance. If you fire that weapon, you will stop my heart. Then stop resisting. I am paralyzed, Elijah enunciated slowly. From the waist down, T12 vertebrae. Operation Desert Storm. Shrapnel. Vanna hesitated, just for a second. The mention of military service usually brought a little grace, but Vanna's ego was already too committed. To back down now would be to admit he was wrong in front of the girl with blue hair and the rich people in the cafe. He couldn't do that. Stolen valor, Vanna scoffed. You think I haven't heard that one before? You people will say anything to get out of a ticket. He holstered the taser and grabbed his baton. Fine. You can't walk? I'll help you. Vanna stepped in, grabbing Elijah by the collar of his windbreaker. He hauled him forward. Elijah was dead weight. The wheelchair tipped further, the motor whining in protest. Officer, stop! A man in a suit, the businessman from earlier, stepped forward. This is excessive. He's disabled. Back off. Vanna shoved the businessman hard, sending him stumbling. He's reaching for a weapon. I saw a weapon. There was no weapon. There was only Elijah's phone, clipped to his belt. Vanna yanked Elijah out of the chair. It was brutal and ungraceful. Elijah hit the concrete hard. His legs sprawled at unnatural angles, lifeless and heavy. His cap flew off, revealing grey hair cropped close. He gasped, the wind knocked out of him, his cheek scraping against the rough pavement. Stop resisting, Vanna screamed, dropping a knee into the small of Elijah's back. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot through Elijah's nervous system, not from his legs, but from the impact site on his spine, where the nerves were still sensitive. He gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out. He had endured torture in a basement in Beirut. He wouldn't break for a strip mall cop in Charleston. Hands behind your back. Vanna wrenched Elijah's arms back. The handcuffs clicked, one then the other. Tight, too tight, cutting into the thin skin of Elijah's wrists. You are under arrest for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer, Vanna panted, sweat dripping from his nose onto Elijah's neck. Elijah lay there, face pressed into the dirt. He took a deep breath, smelling the oil from the cruiser and the spilled coffee. Officer Vanna, Elijah said. His voice was muffled, but steady. Vanna froze. He hadn't given his name. His badge was currently obscured by the angle of his body. How do you know my name? Vanna demanded, pressing his knee harder. I know a lot of things, Elijah whispered. I know your badge number is 4922. I know you transferred from the North Precinct 3 months ago after 2 excessive force complaints were swept under the rug. I know your father was a sergeant, which is the only reason you still have a job. Vanna recoiled, as if he'd been burned. He scrambled off Elijah's back, drawing his gun this time. He pointed it at the old man lying helpless on the ground. Who are you? Vanna's voice cracked. The arrogance was fracturing, replaced by a sudden, creeping dread. Who are you talking to? I'm talking to you, Kyle, Elijah said, rolling onto his side with difficulty. And you should really check the tag on that wheelchair you just kicked over. Vanna glanced at the overturned wheelchair. It was a high-end model, rugged and heavy. On the back, bolted to the frame, was a small silver plate. It wasn't a medical brand. It was a government asset tag. Property of US Gov. DOJ, FBI. Classified asset. Vanna stared at the tag. The letters seemed to swim before his eyes. DOJ. FBI. You stole it, Vanna stammered, desperation clawing at his throat. You stole government property. My phone, Elijah said calmly. Left pocket. Dial the last number called. It's labeled Director. Vanna stared at him. The crowd was silent now. The phones were still recording. Do it, Elijah commanded. The authority in his voice was absolute. It wasn't the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a man who used to command task forces that toppled cartels. Vanna's hand shook as he reached into Elijah's pocket. He pulled out an old, ruggedized smartphone. He unlocked it. There was no passcode. The last call was, indeed, to Director. Vanna looked at the phone, then at Elijah, then at the gun in his hand. He holstered the gun. His palms were sweating. He pressed the call button and put it on speaker, holding it out like a bomb that was about to detonate. It rang once. "Agent Bennett," a voice boomed from the speaker. It was crisp, authoritative, and terrifyingly familiar to anyone in law enforcement. "I see your GPS panic beacon just triggered. Are you compromised? We have units 3 minutes out." Vanna's blood ran cold. The voice belonged to Special Agent in Charge, SAC, Richard Halloway, the head of the regional FBI field office, a man whose face was on the news every other week. Vanna squeaked. "Who is this?" Halloway's voice dropped an octave. "Where is Agent Bennett?" This is Officer Vanna, Charleston PD. We have a situation." "Officer Vanna," Elijah called out from the ground. "Tell him what you did. Tell him you just assaulted a retired senior special agent and threw a federal witness protection liaison out of his wheelchair." Silence on the other end of the line. A silence so heavy it felt like it could crush bones. Then Halloway spoke. His voice was ice. "Officer Vanna, listen to me very carefully. You are going to holster your weapon. You are going to help Agent Bennett back into his chair. And then you are going to get on your knees and pray that he decides not to press charges before I get there. Because I am currently doing 80 miles an hour down King Street, and if my agent has so much as a scratch on him, I will personally ensure you never work as a mall cop, let alone a police officer, ever again." Sirens wailed in the distance, not the chirp of a patrol car, the heavy, multi-tone wail of federal SUVs. Vanna looked at the phone. He looked at Elijah. Elijah smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I think," Elijah said, "you're going to need a lawyer." The silence following Agent Halloway's threat was deafening, pierced only by the distant, rapidly approaching wail of sirens. Officer Kyle Vanna stood frozen, the phone still in his hand like a hot coal. He looked down at Elijah Bennett, who was still lying on the pavement, dust coating his cheek, his wrists bound behind his back in the dirt. Vanna started, his voice trembling. Let me get those cuffs off, sir." He reached for his belt, fumbling for the key. Panic had set in, a primal, animalistic urge to undo the last 5 minutes of his life. If he could just get the old man up, brush him off, maybe apologize, he could spin this. Misunderstanding, heat of the moment. Thought he saw a gun. Vanna knelt, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the key. It clattered onto the concrete next to Elijah's face. "Don't," Elijah said. The word was soft, but it hit like a hammer. "Sir, please," Vanna pleaded, scrambling to pick up the key. "I need to get you up. The pavement is hot. Let me help you." "I said don't touch me," Elijah repeated. He turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto Vanna's. "You put me down here, officer. You made sure everyone saw you do it. Now, you're going to wait until my people get here to pick me up. I want them to see exactly how you treat a decorated federal agent." "Please," Vanna whispered, sweat stinging his eyes. "My dad, the department. If they see this, you should have thought about that before you tipped a paraplegic out of his chair," Elijah replied coldly. The sirens were on top of them now. But it wasn't the local patrol cars. 2 black Chevrolet Tahoes jumped the curb, screeching to a halt on the lawn, tearing up the pristine grass Vanna had been so worried about protecting. The doors flew open before the wheels stopped moving. 6 men and women spilled out. They weren't wearing standard police blues. They wore windbreakers with bold yellow lettering, FBI. They carried carbines at the low ready, their movements precise, fluid, and terrifyingly professional. Leading them was Special Agent in Charge Richard Halloway. He was a bear of a man, 50-something, with a silver crew cut and a suit that looked like it was struggling to contain his rage. "Federal agents!" Halloway bellowed. "Everyone back, now!" The crowd, which had grown to nearly 30 people, scrambled backward. Halloway's eyes swept the scene. He saw the overturned wheelchair. He saw the spilled coffee. He saw Officer Vanner, pale as a sheet, holding a handcuff key. And he saw Elijah Bennett, face down in the dirt. Halloway didn't run. He stalked. He closed the distance to Vanner in 3 long strides. "Drop the key," Halloway growled. Vanner dropped it. "Sir, I didn't know." He wouldn't comply. "I thought—" "Back up," Halloway ordered, stepping between Vanner and Elijah. He pointed a finger at 2 of his agents. "Simmons, Diaz, secure the perimeter. No one leaves. Get witness statements. Grab every cell phone recording you can find. We need that footage as evidence." Halloway knelt beside Elijah. His demeanor shifted instantly from rage to gentle concern. "Eli," Halloway said softly. "You okay? Anything broken?" "Just my pride, Rick," Elijah grunted, wincing as he tried to shift his weight. "And maybe a rib. This kid has a heavy knee." "Get the EMTs over here," Halloway shouted over his shoulder. He turned back to Elijah. "I'm going to cut these cuffs, Eli. Hold still." Halloway pulled a large pair of bolt cutters from a tactical pouch. He didn't bother with the key. With a sharp snap, the handcuffs sheared open. Elijah's arms fell free, and he groaned as the blood rushed back into his hands. "Help me up," Elijah said. Halloway and another agent, a young woman named Diaz, gently lifted Elijah. They moved with a reverence that made Vanner's stomach churn. They righted the heavy motorized wheelchair, checked it for damage, and carefully settled Elijah back into the seat. Elijah took a moment to adjust his jacket. He put his baseball cap back on. Then he slowly turned the chair to face Vanner. Vanner was now surrounded. 2 FBI agents stood behind him, not touching him, but close enough that he could feel their heat. A local police cruiser had finally arrived, and a sergeant, Sergeant Miller, was running toward them, looking confused and out of breath. "What the hell is going on here?" Miller shouted, looking between Vanner and the feds. "Vanner, what did you do? Who are these guys?" Halloway stood up to his full height and flashed his badge. "Special Agent in Charge Halloway, FBI. Your officer just assaulted a federal agent during an active undercover operation. He also committed a civil rights violation under Title 18, Section 242. Sergeant Miller's face went slack. He looked at Vanner. "Kyle, is this true?" "Sarge, He was loitering. He refused to move." Vanner stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Elijah. "He wouldn't stand up. He's paralyzed, you moron!" Halloway roared, his voice echoing off the cafe walls. Miller closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Oh, God. Kyle, you didn't—" "He resisted," Vanner cried, tears now welling in his eyes. "He was reaching for something." Elijah motored his chair forward a few inches. The whine of the electric motor was the only sound in the plaza. "I was reaching for my ID," Elijah said calmly. "But you didn't want to see it. You wanted a show. You wanted to teach the old man a lesson." Elijah looked at Sergeant Miller. "Sergeant, I suggest you take Officer Vanner's badge and gun immediately. Unless you want the Bureau to process him right here on the sidewalk. It might make the 6 o'clock news look a little aggressive." Miller nodded, his face grim. He turned to Vanner. "Kyle, badge and gun. Now." "Sarge, you can't be serious. They're lying. He's lying. Do it, Miller snapped. Trembling, Vanner unholstered his Glock and handed it to Miller, grip first. Then, with fumbling fingers, he unpinned the silver shield from his chest. As the badge came off, Vanner felt a strange lightness, as if his soul was being stripped away with the metal. Without the badge, he was just a man in a polyester shirt standing in a puddle of spilled coffee. "Am I under arrest?" Vanner asked, his voice small. Holloway stepped in close, leaning down so his face was inches from Vanner's. "Not yet, son," Holloway whispered. "Today you're just suspended. We're going to let you go home. We're going to let you sit in your living room and think about what happened. We want you to sweat. We want you to lawyer up. Because when we do come for you, and we will, it's going to be for a lot more than just knocking over an old man." Holloway patted Vanner on the cheek. It was a demeaning, dismissive gesture. "Get him out of my sight," Holloway told Miller. As Miller led a sobbing, broken Vanner toward the patrol car, the crowd at the cafe, which had been silent, broke into applause. Elijah didn't smile. He just watched the patrol car drive away. "You okay, Eli?" Holloway asked, putting a hand on his friend's shoulder. "I'm fine, Rick," Elijah said, his eyes still fixed on the retreating car. "But the bait is taken. Vanner is the weak link. Now we just have to wait for the rest of the chain to break." The interrogation room at the FBI field office was different from the ones at the precinct. It was cleaner, colder, and soundproofed to a level that made the silence press against your eardrums. But Officer Kyle Vanner wasn't in the interrogation room. Not yet. He was sitting in his living room, 3 hours after the incident. The curtains were drawn, the television was off. He was staring at his phone, but he couldn't unlock it. His hands were shaking too hard. His phone had been blowing up for the last hour. Texts from other cops, calls from his union rep, and notifications, hundreds of them, from Twitter and YouTube. Charleston PD, Jarsar's police brutality. Justice for Bennett. The video was everywhere. Sarah, the girl with the blue hair, had uploaded it within minutes. The angle was perfect. It showed everything. Vanner mocking Elijah. The shove, the kick, the way Elijah fell, helpless and heavy. And then the audio. Crystal clear. "I am paralyzed. Operation Desert Storm. Stolen valor. Get up." Vanner threw his phone across the room. It hit the wall and cracked, but he didn't care. He poured himself a glass of whiskey. Neat. He downed it in one gulp. He told himself it was going to be okay. He was a cop. Cops protected their own. His dad knew the chief. They would spin this. They would say the old man was aggressive, that the video was edited. A heavy knock at the door made him jump. Whiskey splashed onto his hand. "Kyle, open up! It's Stan!" Vanner rushed to the door. It was Stan Kowalski, his union representative and a veteran patrolman. Stan looked like he'd aged 10 years in a day. "Stan," Vanner breathed, opening the door wide. "Tell me you fixed it. Tell me they're killing the story." Stan walked in and didn't sit down. He looked at Vanner with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Kyle, sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want to know what's happening. Why did Miller take my badge?" "Sit down," Stan barked. Vanner sat. "There's no fixing this, Kyle," Stan said, his voice low. "I just came from a meeting with the chief and the district attorney. The feds are involved. Heavy. This isn't just an assault charge." "It was one old man," Vanner shouted. "Okay, so he was a fed in the 90s. Who cares? It's a misunderstanding." Stan shook his head slowly. "You don't get it. You really didn't look at him, did you?" "What?" Stan pulled a file folder out of his jacket and tossed it onto the coffee table. It slid across the wood, hitting the whiskey glass. "Read it." Vanner opened the file. The first page was a photo of Elijah Bennett, but much younger. He was standing in front of a burning building, wearing a flak jacket, holding a rifle. He looked terrifying. Elijah Bennett, Stan read aloud, reciting from memory. Joined the Bureau in 1980, specialized in counter-terrorism and deep-cover narcotics. He spent 3 years undercover with the Sinaloa cartel. He's the guy who took down the Iron Brotherhood Aryan gang in 2005. He took a bullet in the spine during a raid in 12, protecting a witness. Vanna felt sick. Okay, so he's a hero. Great. That makes me look like an arse. But it's not illegal to be an arse. Keep reading, Stan said grimly. Vanna flipped the page. Integrity unit? Vanna asked. What's that? It means he hunts dirty cops, Kyle, Stan said. He retired from field work, but the DOJ brings him in when they suspect systemic corruption in a department. They use him as a stress test. They drop him into a neighborhood where they have reports of officers abusing power, profiling, or stealing seized cash. He sits there, he looks vulnerable, and he waits to see who bites. Vanna's mouth went dry. It was a setup. It was a trap, Stan corrected. And you didn't just walk into it. You did a cannonball. But why me? Because your name has been on the list for months, Kyle. The unexplained cash deposits in your account, the complaints from the drug dealers that their stash money was missing after you arrested them. The feds have been watching the Blue Squad, you, Miller, and Jenkins, for 6 months. Vanna stood up, knocking the chair over. They can't prove any of that. They don't have to, Stan said quietly, because they have the phone. What phone? Bennett's phone, the one you held, the one you were recording on when you called Holloway. Bennett's phone wasn't just a phone. It was a cloning device. Vanna stared at him, uncomprehending. When you held his phone, Stan explained, and kept it near your body cam and your own department-issued phone in your pocket, the tech guys say it established a near-field link. It dumped your data, everything on your personal phone. The texts where you bragged about the seizure tax, the photos of the money, the group chat with Miller. Vanna sank to his knees. The room spun. They have everything, Kyle. The assault on Bennett was just the cherry on top to get immediate custody of you. They're coming for the whole squad. Sirens wailed outside again. Closer this time. Stan looked at the door, then back at Vanna. I'm not here to represent you, Kyle. The union is cutting you loose. We don't defend cops who steal. We don't defend cops who beat up crippled veterans. Stan walked to the door and opened it. Outside, the lawn was bathed in red and blue light. But it wasn't the police. It was the FBI again. Holloway was there, standing by the hood of his Tahoe, arms crossed. Send him out, Stan, Holloway called out. Stan looked back at Vanna. Good luck, Kyle. You're going to need it. Stan walked away, leaving the door wide open. Vanna looked at the open door. He looked at the whiskey glass. He looked at the file on the table with Elijah Bennett's face staring up at him. Stern, unforgiving, and patient. He realized then that the old man in the wheelchair hadn't just ended his career. He had ended his life as he knew it. Slowly, weeping openly, Kyle Vanna walked out the door and into the waiting handcuffs of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But the twist wasn't over. As Vanna was shoved into the back of the SUV, he saw another car pull up, a sleek, black sedan. The window rolled down. Elijah Bennett was sitting in the back seat. He wasn't wearing the baseball cap anymore. He was wearing a suit. He looked powerful. Vanna locked eyes with him through the glass. Elijah didn't smile. He just tapped the glass once with his knuckle. Knock, knock. Then the window rolled up and the sedan drove away, heading toward the precinct to finish the job. The interrogation room was freezing. It was a calculated tactic, of course. Keep the subject cold, uncomfortable, and anxious. Kyle Vanner sat at the metal table, his hands cuffed to the bar, bolted to the floor. He had been there for 4 hours. No water. No lawyer. Not yet. He had waived his right to counsel in a panic, believing that if he just explained things to Holloway, the Brotherhood would protect him. He was wrong. The door buzzed and swung open. But it wasn't Holloway who walked in. It was Elijah Bennett. Elijah wasn't in his wheelchair. He was walking. Slowly with a cane, his legs stiff and braced. But he was walking. The sight hit Vanner like a physical blow. The man he had mocked as a cripple was standing upright, filling the room with a terrifying, silent gravity. Elijah pulled out a chair and sat down opposite Vanner. He placed the cane on the table with a heavy thud. "You can walk," Vanner whispered, his voice hoarse. "I can stand for short periods," Elijah corrected, his voice calm. "And I can walk when I have to. Pain is a great motivator, Kyle. You'll learn that soon." "I didn't mean to hurt you," Vanner blurted out. "It was the heat, the stress. You know how it is out there." Elijah stared at him. He didn't blink. "I know exactly how it is. I spent 3 years in a hole in Juarez pretending to be a heroin trafficker. I know stress. What you felt wasn't stress, Kyle. It was entitlement." Elijah opened a file folder. He slid a photo across the table. It was a picture of Sergeant Miller, Vanner's boss and mentor, sitting in a room just like this one, but down the hall. "Do you know what your sergeant is doing right now?" Elijah asked. Vanner shook his head. "He's cutting a deal," Elijah said. "He's telling Agent Holloway that you were a loose cannon, that he tried to rein you in, that he had no idea you were shaking down dealers and pocketing the cash. He claims you were the ringleader of the Blue Squad corruption." "That's a lie!" Vanner screamed, straining against the cuffs. "Miller taught me everything. He took the biggest cut. He bought a boat with the seized drug money last month." Elijah leaned back, crossing his arms. "I know he did. We have the receipts for the boat. But right now, it's a race, Kyle. The first one to talk gets the reduced sentence. The second one gets the book thrown at them. And right now, Miller is singing like a canary. He's painting you as the monster who assaulted a disabled veteran, a rogue cop who couldn't be controlled." Vanner began to hyperventilate. The walls were closing in. He had worshipped Miller. He had done everything Miller asked. "He said that," Vanner choked out. "He called you a liability," Elijah said. "He said, and I quote, 'Vanner always had a sadistic streak. I should have fired him months ago.'" Something inside Vanner snapped. The loyalty, the thin blue line, the brotherhood. It all evaporated. There was only survival left. "I want a deal," Vanner hissed, his eyes wild. "I'm listening," Elijah said, tapping a pen on the table. "I can give you the safe house," Vanner said, the words tumbling out. "Miller keeps the big stash in a rental property on Elm Street. Cash, guns, unregistered narcotics they plant on suspects. It's all there. I have the key code." Elijah didn't smile, but his eyes tightened. "Go on." "And the DA," Vanner continued, desperate now. "Assistant District Attorney Howell. He's on the payroll. He drops charges for anyone Miller tells him to. I can prove it. I have the text messages. I saved them all." Elijah wrote something down. "You kept insurance." "I'm not stupid," Vanner said, though he looked anything but smart in that moment. "No," Elijah said softly. "You're not stupid, Kyle. You're just weak, and weak men are dangerous." Elijah stood up. He tapped the glass of the two-way mirror. The door opened, and 2 agents walked in with a stenographer. "Get it all on record," Elijah ordered the agents. every word, every name, every date. He turned back to Vanna. You're going to tell them everything. And when you're done, you're going to pray that the judge has more mercy than you showed me today. As Elijah walked out, Vanna slumped forward, sobbing into his arms. He was saving his skin, but he was destroying his world. He was a rat, a snitch, and in prison that was a death sentence. 6 months later. The atmosphere inside the federal courthouse in Charleston was suffocating. Outside, the media circus was in full swing. The video of Officer Vanna tipping Elijah out of his wheelchair had racked up 40 million views, igniting a firestorm of protests and demanding legislative reform. But inside Courtroom 4B, there was no shouting. There was only a heavy, expectant silence. Kyle Vanna sat at the defense table, a ghost of the man he used to be. The swaggering cowboy who had terrorized the historic district was gone. In his place sat a man who had shrunk inside his oversized orange jumpsuit. He had dropped 30 pounds. His aggressive buzz cut had grown out into patchy, neglected tufts. He stared at the mahogany table, afraid to look up. The Blue Squad was no more. Vanna's testimony had been the final nail in the coffin for the corrupt unit. Sergeant Miller, the man Vanna had once idolized, was already sitting in a federal cell, serving a 20-year sentence. The assistant district attorney had been disbarred. 7 other officers were facing indictments. But today, the spotlight was solely on Vanna. In the front row of the gallery, Elijah Bennett sat in his wheelchair. The long days of the trial had taken a toll on his back, but his posture remained upright, unyielding. Beside him sat Sarah. She was unrecognizable from the barista in the viral video. She wore a sharp charcoal suit, her blue hair dyed back to a natural shade. She was currently enrolled in criminal justice classes at the local university, her application bolstered by a letter of recommendation from a retired FBI legend. Judge Reynolds presided over the bench. She was a woman known for her iron constitution and her absolute disdain for public corruption. She shuffled the sentencing papers, the sound echoing like dry leaves in the quiet room. She peered over the rim of her spectacles, fixing Vanna with a gaze that could strip paint. "Mr. Vanna," she began, her voice measured but cutting. "You have entered guilty pleas for the deprivation of civil rights under color of law, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, and obstruction of justice. The court acknowledges your cooperation with the FBI. Your testimony was instrumental in dismantling a criminal enterprise masquerading as a police unit." Vanna nodded slightly, a desperate hope flickering in his chest. Maybe probation, he thought. Maybe house arrest. However, Judge Reynolds continued, her tone dropping an octave, becoming colder. "Cooperation is not absolution. You were sworn to protect the most vulnerable members of this society. Instead, you chose to prey upon them. You used your badge not as a shield, but as a weapon to enforce your own ego." The judge paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The victim, Mr. Bennett, is a man who dedicated his life to the service of this nation. You treated him like refuse. And what keeps this court awake at night is the question, what would you have done if he had been anyone else? What would have happened to a citizen who didn't have a direct line to the FBI?" Vanna couldn't breathe. He picked at a loose thread on his jumpsuit. "Kyle Vanna," the judge announced, "I sentence you to 15 years in a federal correctional institution. You are ineligible for parole. Upon your release, you will serve an additional 5 years of supervised probation." The gavel came down with a thunderous crack. A collective gasp swept through the room. 15 years. It was a sentence meant to send a message to every precinct in the state. From the back of the courtroom, a wail pierced the silence. Vanna's mother, collapsing into her hands. Vanna didn't move. He sat frozen, the blood draining from his face. 15 years. He did the math instantly. He would be 45 when he walked free. His youth, his career, his life, extinguished. 2 U.S. Marshals moved in, hauling him to his feet to reshackle his wrists. As the metal cuffs clicked, a sound he had inflicted on so many others, Vanna turned his head toward the gallery. He found Elijah. Elijah didn't look happy. There was no gloating in his eyes, only a profound, weary sadness. He met Vanna's gaze and nodded once. It was a gesture of finality, a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. "I'm sorry," Vanna mouthed, the word silent but unmistakable. Elijah simply watched him. As the marshals led Vanna toward the side door, the reality of his future crashed down on him. He wasn't going to a minimum security camp. He was headed to a medium security penitentiary. And thanks to the global news coverage, every inmate inside those walls already knew exactly who he was. The karma wasn't the 15 years. The karma was the fear, the absolute, suffocating terror of knowing that for the next 5,475 days, the predator had officially become the prey. 12 months later, the city park across the street from the daily grind was in full bloom, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air, the same scent that had hung over the city on that fateful Tuesday, but without the oppressive heat. The fountain in the center of the plaza danced, its rhythm drowning out the distant hum of traffic. Elijah Bennett sat in his motorized chair near the water's edge, tossing crumbled bread to a gathering of pigeons. He looked different. The hard, predatory edge he had carried during the investigation had softened. The hunter was gone. In his place sat a man who had finally earned his rest. "Mr. Bennett?" The voice was familiar, but the tone was new. It held a steeliness that hadn't been there before. Elijah pivoted his chair. Standing before him was a young woman. The bright blue hair and nose ring were gone, replaced by a tight regulation bun and a clean face. She wore a crisp navy uniform, the creases sharp enough to cut paper. On her hip, gleaming in the afternoon sun, was a gold shield. It was Sarah. "Cadet, or should I say, officer?" Elijah grinned, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Probationary officer, sir," Sarah replied, a flush of pride rising in her cheeks. "I walked the stage yesterday. I wanted you to be the first to see it." Elijah motored closer, his eyes dropping to the badge pinned to her chest. He studied it with the gravity of a man who knew exactly what it cost to wear one. "It looks heavy," Elijah murmured. Sarah touched the metal fingertip. "It is." "Good," Elijah said, his voice dropping to a serious rumble. "Never let it feel light. The day that badge feels light is the day you start forgetting what it stands for. It's not a pass, Sarah. It's a promise. You carry that weight so the people behind you don't have to." "I know," she nodded, her expression solemn. "I learned that watching you. You learned it by watching what happens when someone forgets it," Elijah corrected gently. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the cooing of the birds. "Have you heard anything?" Sarah asked, her voice lowering. "About Vanna?" Elijah nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "I still have friends in the Bureau of Prisons." "How is he?" "Alive," Elijah stated flatly. "He's in protective custody, solitary confinement for his own safety. 23 hours a day in a concrete box. He has a lot of time to think." Does he say anything?" "He writes to me," Elijah revealed. Sarah's eyes widened. "He writes to you? After everything?" "Every single week. A handwritten letter," Elijah said. "He talks about the books he's reading to keep his mind sharp. He talks about the sun, how he misses the feeling of it on his skin." He's looking for redemption, Sarah. He's trying to find a way to live with himself. Do you forgive him? She asked. Elijah watched a pigeon take flight, its wings beating against the air. Forgiveness is a private matter, he said softly. I let go of my anger the moment they put him in handcuffs. Holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other man to die. But justice had to be served. He broke the sacred trust of his office. He has to pay the debt. Elijah turned back to her. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small, heavy object. It was a coin, the brass worn smooth by decades of worry and thumb rubbing. Here, Elijah said, pressing it into her palm. Sarah looked down. It was an old FBI challenge coin. On the back, etched in relief, was the Latin phrase, Fiat Justitia Ruat Caelum. Let justice be done though the heavens fall, she translated, her voice trembling. Keep it, Elijah commanded. Carry it in your pocket. When the job gets hard, and it will, or when you think no one is watching, touch that coin. Remember Kyle Vanner. Remember that the authority you hold is borrowed from the people. It doesn't belong to you. Sarah closed her fist around the coin, holding it like a lifeline. I won't let you down, Elijah. I know you won't, he smiled, waving a hand dismissively. Now go on. Get to work. The world isn't going to save itself, and my coffee is getting cold. Sarah laughed, a bright, hopeful sound. She straightened her uniform, gave him a sharp nod, and turned to walk toward her patrol car. Her step was firm, her path clear. Elijah watched her go until the cruiser disappeared into the city traffic. He picked up his paper cup, black, no sugar, and took a slow sip. The monster had been caged, the garden had been weeded, and a new guardian was on the watch. He looked up at the vast, cloudless blue sky, feeling the warmth on his face. Not a bad ending, he whispered to the wind. Elijah Bennett closed his eyes, listening to the fountain, a warrior who had finally laid down his sword, at peace in the city he had helped save. And that is the story of how one moment of arrogance destroyed a corrupt empire. Officer Vanner thought he was kicking a helpless old man, but he ended up kicking the pillar that held up his own destruction. It's a brutal reminder that character is how you treat people who can do nothing for you and nothing to you, or so you think. Elijah Bennett proved that true strength isn't about physical power. It's about integrity, patience, and the courage to hold the line. Vanner learned the hard way that the badge doesn't make you a king, it makes you a servant. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you have stepped in? And do you think Vanner's sentence of 15 years was fair or too harsh? I want to hear your verdict in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more true crime dramas like this. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story of instant karma. Stay safe, stay kind, and remember, you never know who you're talking to. See you in the next one.